Deze podcast is powered by ACC ICT, de nummer 1 Kubernetes specialist van Nederland. So welcome to a new episode of the Dutch Kubernetes podcast, the podcast about Kubernetes for everybody. I am your host, Ronald Kers, and with me is, like always,
Jan Stomphorst, Solutions Architect at ACC ICT. That's in Dutch, yeah.
ACC ICT.
Yeah, that's... So we're doing our introductions in Dutch and also the little talk in forehand.
Yeah, that's new.
That's new, yeah.
Yeah, we listen to feedback of our listeners. So if our listeners have more feedback, please send us your feedback and we will try to incorporate it.
Of course, we'll do that. So there's a new version out, Ronald.
No, not yet, right? It's coming next week.
Yeah, but there's a new version out, almost.
Almost, yeah. 1.36, and as of now, we are recording this. We don't have a name yet, no official name. Maybe our guest knows something we don't, but we're going to find out very soon.
So our guest is going to tell us everything about this new version, hopefully.
Yeah. So I would like to welcome Nigel Douglas to our podcast. Welcome, Nigel.
No, thank you very much for having me. And unfortunately, I don't know the code name for the 136 version.
So we have to keep the listeners in suspense for a few more days, and we will update it properly. So, Nigel, welcome again, and can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
So my name's Nigel Douglas. I'm developer relation here at Cloudsmith. So for those who don't know what developer relations is, we essentially work with software developers, platform engineers, SREs, anyone in this area to really just try to translate sometimes a lot of information into the concise information that matters so that they can focus on their job.
Okay. And how did you get started in the IT? Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I've worked for a lot of software vendors at this point and gone through a lot of different roles. So I think when I started off my journey, it was help desk type roles. So working for software vendors, sometimes working for non-software companies, pharmaceuticals and the likes, doing help desk work. So it's taking tickets, responding to an incident where, some software won't update and ultimately helping them to solve those problems. This type of help desk work kind of transitioned into cybersecurity related field where you're doing kind of more help desk related thing and solving problems. So what we call customer success or these kind of roles. So I've been working in the software field for a while. I think over time you start to find it in an area, niche that you feel you can add the most help in. And this ended up becoming open source. So that's kind of where I'm at today.
Cool.
And from open source, you rolled into the Kubernetes.
Yeah, exactly. So I was working with a vendor called Tigera. I don't know how familiar people are with Tigera here, but they work on a project called Calico. So there are really two CNIs. I mean, there are more CNI options, but there are two big ones when it comes to Kubernetes. So there's Calico and Cilium. And so I was working with the community on Calico, and that's really my first real hand with Kubernetes. I was working a little bit close to it in the past in a vendor working on an APM technology, so application performance monitoring. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I worked at Sysdig, they had Falco, which was a CNCF graduate project, but at the time we were going through the graduation process. So very much in that CNCF ecosystem for a few years now.
Cool. Yeah, cool. We had Sysdig also in the podcast.
Amazing. Yeah, no, they're great people.
So Kubernetes 1.36, because this episode is dedicated to that. We already talked a little bit about inviting you back in a later podcast to talk more about Cloudsmith, but our focus now is 1.36. It's the first major release of 2026. And it's got a lot of exciting updates, security, AI, hardware. So Nigel, according to you, what can we expect in 1.36?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things. I can't remember how many, was it 36 changes or so? The number changes all the time because some things don't really get to the release. I think to your point about hardware, that seems to be the biggest fundamental shift. Because Kubernetes is about 10 years old at this point. So, it's not going to see seismic changes over time because it's very much quality of life changes at this point. We have the security pieces, we have the fundamental features sorted out. But then AI came along. Now we're at this point where we're saying, okay, Kubernetes is a great platform for orchestrating AI related workloads. We see ChatGPT using Kubernetes as the orchestration layer for that kind of thing. So that's where DRA came into place, this dynamic resource allocation.
Yeah.
You're going to see a significant percentage of all of those changes that are coming in, especially the net new features that are coming in 136 related to DRA, this dynamic resource allocation.
So that's getting more and more important. We've talked really a lot about DRA, but what are the changes in this version specifically?
Yeah, so there's a few of them. So the first thing is, let's say you get DRA out. You just say, look, we've got this new concept, this new object API, dynamic resource allocation. And great, you've solved the problem where we're not just dealing with CPU memory. Now we have GPU and we can talk to the underlying hardware related to these kind of NVIDIA type technologies. But then you realize, okay, this is like not even stable yet. So obviously we've got to graduate it to a point where we can get this DRA stable. And then once you got it stable, you realize, oh, a lot of the controls I can do today to be secure, I can't apply the same logic to DRA. And that requires more and more Kubernetes enhancements, to get that. So one obvious example that we're seeing in 136 is related to constraints, tolerations, this kind of thing. So today I could set taints and tolerations around something CPU related. So I could say, goodness, I wouldn't want someone to abuse that Kubernetes workload, from a crypto mining perspective or something like that. So you set these thresholds on realistically what is the ceiling limit on resources that we could use from a CPU perspective. But that same rule wasn't applied to something like DRA. So we've only just got this kind of taints and tolerations brought in now with DRA to say, define similar ceiling limits. So these are kind of not just quality of life improvements, but they're actually so that we can make it more secure around the DRA enhancements.
Okay. Is that also the fact if you have a GPU and that GPU gets degraded or has some problem, is that also a thing that they added?
Yeah. So you're saying like if performance degrades and then you're seeing an unusual spike in.
Yeah, just like overheating or something.
Yeah.
So your GPU overheats and it gets degraded in performance. It's still working, but is that something that they add?
I don't know if that's in today, but what I mean, this is the beauty of these enhancements is if that is information that you can essentially pull and retrieve that information about degradation again in the actual GPU type technology, then that is something that in theory you could use as defining within a policy to say we now no longer load workloads for that. But I don't believe that's something we have today within DRA.
Okay. Yeah, I was browsing through the user stories.
Yeah.
They added a user story about this and also safe pod evictions and risk and mitigations.
Yeah, I will double check that because that is quite possibly already also addressed in 136 because there are a lot of changes, even to the point where, even when I talk about node, which is, node specific changes, we've made a whole subsection just for DRA on that because there are.
Yeah, they're kind of forced, right, to look into this kind of stuff because Kubernetes is becoming the platform for AI workloads. So it's only a matter of time, or maybe what you said is already in there, but they are forced to look at this kind of stuff now. Because even Kubernetes was not initially designed for this kind of stuff.
No, and it's just getting better and better. And those hardware constraints, that's a completely new thing. It's not completely new. We're talking about DRA a long time already, but it's still...
It's an important thing.
Yeah, it's getting better and better.
Yeah, and we only have DRA since 134, I'm guessing, is when it all kicked into place. I don't think it even came back as far as 133. So this idea that, let's say, everyone's a few versions behind, but like with the AI, the pace that it's all moving at, a lot of people now have this huge incentive to move on to, well, modern versions of Kubernetes. You can't be too many versions behind because naturally you can't really do any of this today.
No, exactly.
Okay, cool. And the next thing you said, what's changed? Because we've got 36 changes, and the next big thing that's changed in this version is
just pick our favorites.
Yeah.
So you'd ask me what my personal favorite was from the 136?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what we do every time we release these notes, we always actually ask employees internally if there's something they want to throw in where they see something that sounds particularly interesting. So we always have this as the section on, contributors or the, editor's pick is exactly how we call it. So I think the OCI volume source is probably the one that matters the most. And it does tie back to the whole AI change in industry right now. So this idea that, when you packaged everything in the past and it was all in the application layer, like in the application logic, and you ended up having this really bulky image, right, where you had not just application logic, but now you have things like ML models and all sorts of bulkier things. And really no one wants to spend a lot of time on these bulky bills. And then you've obviously going to see a lot more metadata information associated with the more stuff you package into it. So I think the volume source, what that essentially is solving is now this case where you can reference this external volume source, this reference thing, and separate that from the application logic, which means you have these streamlined bills, but you're still able to actually reference and use the heavier things like these LLM models again, so we can orchestrate these AI workloads in Kubernetes.
So do you know how that works?
I've actually not personally used it. So my understanding is volume source is going to be its own API resource. And then you're just going to say, these are things that are used, like essentially a volume is stored thing, like the model as we made as an example. And then the image is just going to have a bunch of referenced volume sources as the things that, rather than building it all together in one go, it'll be a separate build object, I guess, is the volume that we're referencing in volume source.
Could that be a layer or something in your container, or?
Yeah. Like, will it be presented now when it's a running workload? Will it show up as a layer within it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can see it probably might do. Again, it's one of those classic examples of I should probably have this kind of thing deployed in a test bed before, you see how that plays out. But in the way I see it is that's going to be obviously better for organizations when it comes to delivery and making sure that you can build this stuff faster.
Yeah, no, it's awesome, but I'm still thinking about how are they implementing this? There's something to look into.
Look into, yeah.
Yeah, make a podcast about it probably. But yeah, okay. And you've got a next one.
Oh yeah, I mean we have we talked through taints and tolerations was the big one that I thought was interesting in regards to DRA. Again, abuse is a big factor. OCI volume source was the second one mentioned in that editor's pick, and again the manifest-based admission control policies was another one. I think the point being is there's a lot of kind of, you could argue, glaring security flaws in cases with Kubernetes. Again, these things get addressed over time. So this one's a bit of an odd, unusual one, and I never really thought about it. So, when we have our admission control technologies that essentially permit what you can and can't do on a system, the example specified here in the release notes, they were talking around how, on the boot up phase, when the actual node starts up, these admission control policies weren't effectively in place. Like they weren't, able to enforce the same controls during that phase. So we saw here like manifest-based admission control, it seemed to be a really useful case where you could still have that control again during that boot up. So, there wasn't a period where, I don't know, you didn't have coverage after essentially the machine starts up.
So when the machine starts up, you don't have coverage, and then he makes the objects, and then the coverage is coming on the cluster. So they solve that.
Yeah, that seems to be, again, it's quality of life, you could say, is part of it. But I think it's also like tamper proof that there's not like scenarios where essentially you don't have coverage.
So it's a self-protection gap.
Yeah, I'd say that's the best way of putting it.
Yeah. Protecting myself before somebody else tells me what to do.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Oh, that's awesome.
And Jan, do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite?
I think that noticeably is a thing that caught your attention.
Yeah, and there's the mutating admission policy is one of the things. There's more things. Maybe the volume group snapshot.
Yeah.
I'm torn. So you've got a few things, like we said, it's more security. So the nodes, what he said, the manifest based admission control configuration, that's what he was talking about. But they've also changed the mutation admission policy map. It's going to general. How do you say that?
General availability or GA.
Yeah, that one. So they're now using, and we've talked about it also in a prior release, because when it goes general availability, it went through alpha, beta, and then up the pipeline. But this is that you define mutations in the Kubernetes native objects using a cell, so a common express language, and that runs in its own API process.
Mm-hmm.
So every request is hitting an API fixed API process. So authentication, authorization, mutating admission, schema validation, schema admission. So this is just more security for your API.
To prevent tampering, essentially.
Yeah.
We were from idempotency, and again, I hope I said that correctly, but that seems like the idea that it's rerunning that policy check, essentially, isn't it? To stop making changes to it that would otherwise prevent coverage.
So yeah, that's really, I think that's a really important one. And then on storage side, you've got the volume group snapshot.
Yeah. So what does the volume group snapshot? It sounds like an hypervisor functionality or something you do in the VMware volume group snapshotting.
It's just snapshotting more than one disk at a time.
Yeah, but there's two different snapshot features. So sorry, that was on the volume disk, correct? That you were talking about having snapshotting technology for 136.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's also the sorry. Yeah, that was the one. Yeah, exactly, on block volumes. So exactly, it's just having those records for that.
Yeah, it's just snapshotting more than one disks, and then it's for stateful workloads.
But you do that in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So you a snapshot. Do you know what a snapshot is?
Yeah, you take a moment in time.
Yeah.
From the state of your disk.
If you have an application or a VM or something else that uses more than one disk, and sometimes you have that, and you want to create a moment in time for that disk, you will essentially want to create that snapshot for all the machines.
Sure.
So with this case, it's essentially a new API that we're getting in beta. I think the name is snapshot metadata, and essentially it's going to show the metadata between those two instances of those two snapshots.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So yeah, and what else do we have something? So do we have something else awesome?
There's so much. I can't help thinking some things don't apply to me that might be boring. There was native histogram support, and again, it seemed like a big deal within the Prometheus community that they were saying, oh, there was different ways of solving this problem, classic histograms, and that's a different thing from native histograms. And it's essentially the data that they want to be able to show from an observability perspective. So that's all solved now. There's like a feature flag you can turn on. What's it called again? It's just called native histograms, and you can just enable it. It's very simple. Again, it's not something that personally bothers me, but I can see how this, for a lot of organizations, will essentially want to be able to have that information and not have to make choice between classic and native, and then have this breakup and configuration to get that different information. I think we talked about admission control config was a relatively new thing, so that's alpha as well. CRI list streaming is quite interesting, I guess. So, when we're talking about the container runtime interface, the CRI, you just want to be able to do like essentially list streaming, so to be able to show what the information is that you make available from the list output. So, when you do list operation, you just want to be able to say, I don't know, like we have, show what is message limits and stuff like that. That's all presented. But again, these are all relatively new features. They're just quality of life improvements, really. I guess anything regarding, topology aware workload scheduling is quite an interesting one. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that in the 1.36 release notes, but like that's essentially one of those cases where now you have, DRA aware scheduling. So, you can look at the topology map of what's going on with the hardware as well. So again, quite useful. I don't know if there's anything that stood out to you in the alpha features that was interesting, or other than a lot of it's DRA related.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list here, and also like the Git repo volume is now removed. That's also a thing. Maybe it's interesting to note, because
I think it's the only deprecation, right, in the release in the end. Git repo, or they also
Yeah, they removed it because kubelet could otherwise access the internet and clone repositories.
Yeah.
So that's not a thing anymore. So you can properly manage the secrets now. Or you can probably manage it through secrets, to say it correctly.
Yeah.
They got a lot of things that would break things. So they deprecated external server spec, external IPs. That's something you have to watch out for. I don't think we use that anymore a lot, but they deprecated.
Yeah, that was a really, really old CV, wasn't it? That was the 2021, and that was where you could do a man-in-the-middle related attack. So yeah, there was a bunch of ways around it, but I think it affected two things. So I think it was the external IP spec, but it was also, wasn't it something like the load balancer spec as well? I think there was two conditions that could be abused as part of that man-in-the-middle attack. So I think they've removed the service spec external IP example, but I don't. Yeah, maybe that is the only one that's part of that flaw. I'll need to double check it.
Yeah,
but either way, it's
they deprecated this one now in this version. So, and they separate kube control user config from cluster configs.
Yeah,
they did that also. That's something you could break in your deployment, and yeah, that's.
Is that the same as what they did with the kubectl and kubeRC? It's now in beta, so your aliases and preferences are now separate from the kube config, so no environment variable is needed.
Yeah, sounds about the same kind of thing. And it's also so that if you want to make some change, again, RC related, it doesn't have to apply to something else or break anything else.
Yeah.
But this is, it's also an old thing. So pod certificates, something changed there also?
Yeah, I can't remember what that was for pod certificates. This is a new feature, is it?
Yeah, that's an alpha feature. So they changed things here. I think this pod certificate thing is for pluggable system to request a certificate within the Kubernetes cluster, but making certificates available to your workload. Yeah, but they're changing.
This is an alpha feature, correct?
Yeah, they're changing a lot there. But if you use that, it's changing. They're also changing IP CIDR validation improvement. That's something also, if you have that, things change, break.
And I think, it was the point was that they were overly permissive, wasn't it? So that you have to set these really, really long CIDR ranges. So that makes complete sense to solve that. I don't know what they call it. Is it ratcheting validation was the term that they were using to solve that problem?
Ratcheted validation for immutable fields.
Yeah, so
that's what they call that. That's but that's an alternative.
Yeah, so you don't create an object if it fails a strict validation check is the point, isn't it? That's pretty darn useful, to be honest.
So that's if you have that, something's going to change. So look into that. So what also has breaking stuff in there as DRA resource claim status with possible standardized network interface data. That's also an alpha feature. They changed a lot there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Honestly, there's so many useful changes specific in the DRA one. Yeah, resource claims. There's what was the other change that I thought was? Yeah, resource slices and resource claim were there were definitions you couldn't even define before 1.36 correct when it came to DRA. So those are now pretty important when it comes to the resource control piece.
But if you're gonna upgrade from 35 to 36, that's something. Just look at your DRA. It's gonna be changed because it's really new.
Yeah, absolutely.
WebSockets have been replaced by Speedy now officially. It was already going that way, but your RBAC policies maybe need some updating now. And haven't done it yet.
Yeah. That's an old one also.
But still, we have seen at KubeCon we made people at the conference telling us that they just upgraded from what version was it? 1.16 to the latest or something. So there are environments still running in the old versions.
Yeah. And this is the point about Kubernetes, that I always find so hard for people to understand is that there are many, many, many versions behind because there's a lot of moving pieces in Kubernetes. It's not as easy to just say, I'm going to upgrade one version on the day of the new release. It's everything breaks in the environment to the point where when we went to KubeCon, we were talking through this. I know it's not specific to the Kubernetes APIs, but with Nginx, for instance, right? It's this. We now have this deprecated project that, what was it? According to Datadog, they were saying half of instances are still using it.
Yeah. You can't update right to 1.36, I think, if you're still using Nginx, right? Because it's really deprecated.
You can.
Yeah, I think you may still be able to use. I'd imagine you can still have Nginx in your environment. I think the issue is that there's only a few workarounds as far as supported options you can go down. So ChainGuard, to my knowledge, what they're doing is they are releasing a version of Nginx where they're doing the security fixes on it. They're essentially trying to address the CVEs. And they're saying this is a compliant image that you can run inside your Kubernetes environment, but we're not going to add any new features. So by all accounts, it's a deprecated thing, right? Because it's not getting updates. They're just addressing the CV part.
But it's the ingress Nginx, not the Nginx.
Sorry, not the web server part. Just
no, not the ingress. Ingress, because that's from F5, and that's still fully alive. And so you've got two projects. You've got Ingress Nginx. That's the Kubernetes one. That was the better one, by the way.
Yeah.
But we have also a podcast with F5, and that Nginx is still going hot and going strong, and that's not deprecated. So
when we say Nginx in this context, we specifically talk about the Ingress Nginx.
Yeah, and if you've got a few ways to upgrade, you can move to the F5 one or use some other software like Traffic. So but
again, it's not easy because even in Traffic, as to my understanding, they've tried to make it as easy as possible, right?
No, that's not working. Don't do that. They've got a layer in Traffic with support for Nginx, and that's not working.
But isn't the whole thing just to move people to the Gateway API?
Yeah, but Gateway API is, you need still software for that. You need still middleware software for that.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, Gateway API are just different objects. So
Okay.
you need an traffic to do your reverse proxying for you.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So Gateway API is not a solution it's not a complete solution. You need software between your external world and Gateway API, and Gateway API is just the way.
It was always sold to me to like it's the next thing after the ingress,
and
they don't need anything. But that's how it was sold, because I'm not like very involved in the practical part of Kubernetes, so I was not up to date that you need anything more besides the Gateway API.
And you see a lot of things on the internet say, Gateway API, you used to have to use a Gateway API, but still you need some middleware between that, like HA proxy or traffic or the F5 one in Nginx. I'm not sure that they support Gateway API, by the way, but I know traffic does. We use that.
Yeah. I always wonder, are we kind of in a little bit of a doomed situation? Sorry about my phone there. A bit of a doomed situation when it comes to like CRA in particular, the Cyber Resilience Act in New York, because like they'll say that, we can't have highly exploitable vulnerabilities in an environment that are known to be exploited in the wild, that, they're not getting fixed, right? Like there's no patch available because they are deprecated open source dependencies. And yet, at the same time, we're at a stage where you're saying a lot of people are still on 119. They're still going to continue to use that deprecated project. And fundamentally, there's no easy way out, which is probably totally re-architect everything, drop all the projects that are dead, and then, like you say, adopt Gateway API and just get with 2026. That is the only seeming solution, which isn't simple at all. It's near impossible for a lot of people, but do you know what I'm saying? Like if governance is at one place where it's saying you legally have to do this thing now and you have to prove it, and then you've also got organizations that are saying, yeah, but I'm also a few years behind as far as the technology stack goes, and we're still using projects that are no longer maintained.
Yeah, but the simplest solution is just upgrade.
I know. Yeah.
And companies need to remember that you have to go with the flow and upgrading the technical depth, and that's across all bases. Also with Java or your programming language, you have to update. You have to patch your CVs. You have to patch, upgrade, and
but you need to have the knowledge to do it all the time and keep in check what kind of.
You have to hire us as IT people to do the right thing.
The right IT people to do the right thing, right?
Yeah.
Because they're all in a lot of occasions, it just started out as like we have an application on our website, and the developer says, okay, we're going to do this in Kubernetes now, and we run like in 1.19. And then something new comes along, and they have no idea what is going to bring, because they were just developers and not really up to date with the new features or how to change to the new features, like this the Gateway API, or in the past there were maybe a lot of examples where that things happen. So you need to have people around you that really keep up to date with the new features and know what will break if you do upgrade.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
because don't touch it, because it's running, so don't touch it. Well, that's going to keep you up in the long run. Well, it seems always nice. No, it's just working, so don't touch it. Yeah, well, we know where that goes in the long run.
So, yeah, just upgrading is you just need to do it.
Yeah, just do it.
Just do it. So,
anything else that needs our attention in the long list of?
Yeah, the one that it kind of stands out there as a quite interesting was the conditional authorization. So again, it's quality of life stuff, but we have authorization RBAC today. I think where we're seeing here with conditional is like you're being able to make more obvious, broader statements, or not broader, quite the opposite, more fine-grained, in regards to controls you might want to say. So there's the example of like, only allow if storage class is specified within dev or something like that, to the extent where it's really, it's a fine-grained condition. What's this applying to? It's going to apply to, any Kubernetes authorization, so things like RBAC. I can see that being hugely beneficial to most organizations, where you're going to, I'm thinking of the days where everything was just label based, and it was just like really vague things that apply. Now it's like, apply if you find metadata that's related to this thing.
Yeah.
And that is, really powerful.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Jan, anything to add?
Yeah. There are a lot of things, and just glancing through the list, and I think we covered the most of it. So if we sum up, this release is really about security. So probably the name is going to be something with security in it. But
so we can take a guess. Nigel, what do you think? Just take an educated guess.
Sound too good. But that's a very good point actually about security. The more I think about it, like even looking at the user namespace in pods, I think that was sitting around forever, and that's now finally stable. But even like the point mentioned on the doc is just listing off all the CVs that it addressed. So it's like it's not there for you to, notice this, I can do this thing more efficiently. It's more like we've addressed a permissions issue, which now essentially means you're safer. So if I was to come up with a name, it'll be, again, it always has to end in netties, doesn't it? So the last one's like Timbernettes.
The last one was Timbernettes, yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be something like, I don't know, I'm desperate with names, but like something like Shield and Eddies. I don't know.
Shield and Eddies, that's a good one.
The same one, yeah.
Yeah, well, if I look at the list, it was the Timbernettes was the one, but also like Octarine was one.
Hey, yeah, that was a good
Penelope, Eli.
Yeah.
Kubernetes, we forgot, of course. Cannot forget about that one.
Yeah.
And Plant and Eaters.
Plant and Eaters, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's we'll see.
Sometimes it's like a personal thing of the
team.
lead, the team lead.
Yeah.
But but it's fun. Just take a guess. Yeah, what would you guess? What would it be? Just fun, and let's see what happens.
Oh, his one was really good.
Yeah, true, but
wall and eaters.
Wall and eaters.
So something with firewall.
I like it. Yeah.
And you, Ronald?
Well, I'm not. I was trying to look up who's the lead this project. What is
Don't cheat, man. Don't cheat.
Maybe Fire Needis.
Fire Needis.
We'll see. Nigel, if you look at the future of Kubernetes, if I would have a crystal ball like teleported to your desk, what would you like to see in that crystal ball?
Yeah, I think a lot of still more standardization is, I think, what we're kind of agreeing on, which is, we still see a case where a technology that we all rely on ends up deprecating or doesn't get the updates you expect. And that's a real thing that happens in open source. The whole thing's open source. So understandably, that's the case. I'd love to have more standard process so that, for instance, hypothetically, a CNI disappears overnight and you just don't have the CNI that we rely on to do the networking of our cluster, that more and more standards apply, more standard APIs, more standard structures, so that if something disappears, it's very easy to transition to over something new. And I think that's still a gray area, I think, within Kubernetes. And again, Jan, Ronald, you might have different opinions on this, but I find it's always this big conversation every time that something changes and we say, how hard is it going to be to move to this other thing? It's like, it'll all be pretty straightforward since we're all in the exact same ecosystem. So
yeah,
that's my take on it.
You don't need to reinvent the wheel, right?
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, you shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel. You shouldn't be allowed to do that.
Cool.
Yeah, well, Nigel, thank you very much for making your time to have this chat with us because about 1.36. And we definitely will do a follow-up about Cloudsmith and the other things you do in the field of open source. So would love to make that appointment. And yeah, what I said. I'd love to talk to you again in the future. And for now, have a great weekend.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and have a great weekend also.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.